Hi, and welcome to YWCA's Facebook Live Connect, Heal, Learn speaker series. I'm Laura Gomez-Horton, Clinical Director of YWCA Greater Austin. For those of you who are unfamiliar, YWCA provides individual, couple, family, and group therapy, care coordination services, life skills classes, school-based services, consultation, training, and advocacy. Our mission is to eliminate racism, empower women, stand up for social justice, help families, and strengthen communities, which we've been doing in the Central Texas area for over 115 years. And we focus on the intersection of mental health and social justice. This speaker series focuses on inviting subject matter experts to discuss topics connected to mental wellness and social justice. In observance of July being Minority Mental Health Awareness Month, we will be focusing on mental health in the Latino community. In particular, we will highlight disparities and other factors that impact mental health, address destigmatizing mental health care, and emphasize the strengths and resources in the Latino community. Today, we are joined by Lisset, Betancourt, Daniela Maldonado, and Sofia Arenas. Welcome to you all. Bienvenidas. So before we begin, I just talking to all three of you here, and you all can just chime in as we go along. Before we begin, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your connection to the Latino community?
Sure. I will go ahead and go first. So I'm a lead therapist with YWCA right now, but my connection with the Latino community is basically that I grew up there when I was a lot younger. You know, I am Latina, my parents are Latinos, and they're born and raised in Veracruz, Mexico. My brothers and I grew up in Dove Springs, a small community in South Austin, which is predominantly Latinos. And, a lot of my experiences, I went to predominantly Latino schools up until college. And so I felt the need to give back to the Latino community. And I realized along the way, there are many issues that are embedded in our community here in the US.
I can go next. So similar to Lisette, also grew up in a very small, predominantly Latino community. I grew up in a super small town called Crystal City, which is like 30, 45 minutes away from Uvalde, Texas. And so like the area down there is very, very Latino heavy. And so growing up seeing the disparities between like, why don't we have this? Why don't we have that? Why don't we have certain resources? Why is it so hard for us to go to the nearest biggest town, which is like 2.5 hours away, to get mental health support kind of thing, and realizing how much a lot of Latinos were kind of suffering in silence and trying to destigmatize, like, hey, it's normal to feel this way. It's normal for us to be feeling frustrated and overwhelmed kind of thing. And so I just strongly felt like this had to be my passion and drive to try to help.
I was born in Mexico. I was born in Querétaro, Mexico, which is in central Mexico. And I was there for the first 11 years of my life. And then my family and I left, and we've kind of lived all over the place. But we spent a long time in Arizona, which obviously has a very big Latino community as well. And then I've been here for like 3 years. And I've been doing a lot of social work since, I want to say, my undergrad. And in the social work field, I've always loved working with the Latino population and with immigrants, undocumented people. And I value that a lot, being connected to my roots.
Thank you. I guess I should say something about myself too, because I'm part of the Latino community too. I grew up on the border in Laredo, Texas. So most of my life was there until I moved away for college. And so obviously coming to the Austin area, there's not much of, or there wasn't, at least in the college arena, not much of a Latino community until I really started working in social work. And that's where I really became embedded more in the Latino community. But of course, growing up, it was all Latino and so very much involved in that. So it's really interesting hearing your stories or your experiences, because you're representing different experiences of the Latino community, the immigrant experience, the first generation experience, the different, Texas is so big also, so the different areas growing up in Central Texas or South Texas or Southwest Texas is Crystal City, right?
Yes.
And Daniela even in Arizona, which is another experience for Latinos, because everybody growing up around the border there, the US and Mexico border. So that's wonderful. And I know that, the people that we work with are also representing a variety of experiences for the Latino community. So that's wonderful. So Minority Mental Health Awareness Month is supposed to be here right now in July, which is supposed to bring awareness to the mental health struggles of ethnic minority communities, that whatever they are experiencing in the US. So when we're looking at particularly the Latino community, from your experience, do you think that there are mental health concerns within the Latino community, maybe that are obvious or maybe that are not obvious, that you've seen in your experience in working within the community or living within the community?
I'll go first. I definitely think that there are several mental health concerns in our Latino population and community. Just working firsthand with a lot of these individuals, they have many different stories, but they also have intergenerational trauma. And oftentimes these individuals are so resilient so that they don't always recognize that those stressors, right, or those triggers or the trauma that's embedded in them. And so when I get to work with a lot of these people, providing psychoeducation is one of my greatest focus and like interventions, but also validating their experiences, right? But a lot of these individuals see their experiences as this is normal. This is what a lot of people go through. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I think the biggie, sorry, you can go, Daniela.
Yeah, I agree with that, Lisset. And I think that there's just a lack of information, especially in the Latino communities, on what mental health is and what it can look like, as well as what mental health services are. And it's just part of the stigma. There's a big stigma around mental health, and not knowing who to reach out to. I think accessibility is a big part of it. A lot of people don't have access to, whether that is financial or they just don't know about the resources around the community, and it just makes it so people have to deal with it on their own, or they just avoid the issue and whatever they're struggling with, and it just accumulates. And like you said, it can be passed on through generations.
I think there's a lot of stigma and a lot of different nuances that we as Latinos kind of don't understand, and we don't recognize, like, this isn't necessarily normal. Like, it's not normal for us to be up till like 2-3 in the morning with anxiety, right? Shamefully me. And realizing that, okay, this is actually not normal. It's actually okay for me to go ahead and try to get support around this. And no, this isn't normal for us to be feeling this way. And it's okay to start talking about it. And I think we're so quick to brush it off as, oh, it's we don't have the money for it. And it's so hard for us to try to recognize it as we don't try to dry our dirty laundry outside the house, right? We have to do it inside. This has to be swept under the rug. We don't bring it up. We're not going to bring it up. We're not going to talk about it. And I think trying to destigmatize a lot of what has become embedded in intergenerational trauma from like our parents' parents and our parents' parents, and trying to understand, like, yes, we are all feeling the same thing, and it's okay to recognize it, and it's okay to try to figure out how can we break the cycle, or how can we support each other for ourselves and for our future generations to come.
And something that Lisset mentioned early on is that sometimes it's like, just by nature of our culture or our families, we just see it as it's just another thing we need to deal with, and we just move on, and we, le echas ganas, right? You just keep going, you move through it, and and you're okay. And I know that we're talking about like the people we work with, but also within our own families, that seeing that growing up within our own families, and just be like, okay, well, we'll take care of that person because they need some extra support. So there's also that piece of like you said, Sofia, is like not you handle it inside the family, if necessary, you get support from each other and things like that. So and it's just another thing to deal with. It's not necessarily a separate thing. And the other piece that you mentioned also was about we can't afford it. So sometimes it's seen as a what's it called, a privilege, or a
luxury,
a
maybe.
luxury. Thank you. That's the word I was looking for. Yes, it's seen as a luxury, something special, like you go to the spa or something, where in reality it's something that we need to do on a day-to-day basis. Y'all alluded a little bit to this, but it's like, what are some factors that you see really impact people's mental health? What are people dealing with that are really creating some of these stressors or anxiety?
I think, speaking to a lot of the experiences that have been shared with me from, my previous clients that are Latino or undocumented. I think a lot of the factors that are impacting mental health is, I want to say, intergenerational trauma, and the cycles that have been created, from traditional Latino parenting, or, different values that different Latino parents had growing up. And as they begin to raise their children in the United States and the acculturation process happens, it feels like individuals can be torn with two identities. And so then you see them start to exhibit these mental health issues of, I'm too white, but I'm too Mexican, right? Or too Latino. And so it becomes not only an invalidating experience, but everything that person is attempting to learn, attempting to excel at, it becomes 10 times more challenging. And so that can create not only trauma, but it can also create, a type of anxiety, depression, and, among the most common diagnoses of mental health.
I think for me, I've seen within my clients that are also Latinos and undocumented, but a lot of like my first generation Americans and my second generation Americans have had a hard time trying to assimilate and acculturate to like everything that's been going on, right? And then with this new wave of like technology influx, I've seen a huge disparity between like parents not being well versed in how to help children with technology, and then a lot of stressors around that where it's like, I don't know how to help you figure it out on your own, which has been an ongoing theme of a lot of things that a lot of Latinos have had to experience, like trying to go to college for the first time, trying to understand everything else for the first time. It's like, I don't know how to help you figure it out on your own. And I think another part of that is like financial stressors and strains, whether it be like, oh, well, we can't really afford this right now. I'm sorry, we can't get you the newest laptop to help you with school, but figure it out. And trying to understand what that means for Latinos, whether it be just the bare minimum of basics of the housing and how to keep the light on, how to keep the heat on, kind of thing, not necessarily like to go out every weekend to the mall or the movies or whatever it be, but just the bare minimum and just the basics of trying to understand everything, and then trying to make sure that we are still able to provide for each other, but also try to connect with each other at the end of a long day, and feeling stressors from coming home from a long day and still not wanting to, just want to decompress, and not even understanding what that means of just, I just need a breather, because we're so used to just leave him alone. He just came home from work, don't talk to him, versus like, he needs a breather, he just came home from work. And instead of trying to brush it off as something else, maybe like rewording it to try to help destigmatize, like, hey, this is actually a mental health thing that we are addressing right now. You need a breather, you came home from work, okay. And I think not knowing the vocabulary, not knowing how to word it, not knowing what this means necessarily, like, well, what happens if he doesn't get a breather, kind of thing, right? And I think there's a lot of what's the word? We don't have enough education in an essence of not wanting to touch what mental health is, at least from what I've experienced and what I've seen is that we don't touch that because that's not our thing. That's someone else's thing, right? It's some of the things that I've seen.
Yeah, I think going along with that, yeah, capitalism plays a role in that. There's that idea that you have to put your job first, and it's just a lot of people do have to work to survive. And so there's so many other priorities that it leaves like no time, or it's not a priority, and it's a luxury, like Laura, you said, to take care of yourself and to take care of your mental health. And also, I do think that in Latino communities, there's patriarchal ideals in the house where like the man has to be the provider, and that usually comes with like they have to be strong, they can't show any emotion, and they bury it all down. And I think that can cause a lot of stress in the family, and it can affect everyone in the family. If someone's struggling and emotions and processing emotions is not normalized within the family, then it will affect everyone.
Yeah, and Daniela, you're probably opening a whole other door here about the roles in the family, because I know, especially living here in Central Texas, how expensive it is to live in this area where a lot of the moms have to go out and have to work, and then they feel that guilt and shame associated with leaving your kids behind, and because of those role assignments and belief systems and things like that. And yeah, so there's lots of things that impact people's mental health, and it's not necessarily recognized. And in addition to everything that you all mentioned, of course, we are also experiencing racism, discrimination, loss of culture too, because especially a lot of first generation families, you're trying to speak your language and you're being told you're not allowed to, or you're being told to assimilate and acculturate, and rather than just integrate and bring your values and systems. And when you hear in the news, it's like, oh, these people are bad, or these people are, whatever, fill in the blank. So of course, all that impacts how people see themselves. Yeah. So I like to quote one of our therapists who usually says that we are so much more ready to talk about our own digestive systems than we are about mental health. So sometimes, if I were to say, I had food poisoning last night, you all know what that means, right? You all know what's happening to me if I say that. So we're more likely to share that openly than to say, I didn't feel well last night. I was feeling kind of sad, or I was feeling lonely, or I was feeling exhausted or anxious. So it's more acceptable in society in general to talk about those things than to talk about our mental health. So for you all, I'm curious what you believe are some of the barriers for us to openly talk about mental health. What keeps us from just saying, I'm not feeling mentally well today?
Yeah, I think that, a lot of it has to do with not only not wanting to be vulnerable, but maybe not also being able to access that because of previous traumas. And in addition, we have this like preconceived idea that if we are honest, or if that we're real about how we're feeling when someone asks you at the grocery store, hey, how are you doing? And we generally just say, oh, I'm good. How are you? And they say, oh, I'm good. Instead of being real and say, actually, I'm having a really crappy day. Right. And oftentimes that is, I don't want to be a burden to somebody else. Right. So that sense of, I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to bring, a burden to somebody that's struggling with their own stuff. So I think that a lot of it has to do with that, but then just also the stigmas around mental health, that if you are depressed, well, then you're probably unmotivated, or you're probably having a ton of issues, right? And then how you're perceived, right? So you're perceived as maybe weak or vulnerable, or yeah.
I think another thing that has to do with that piggybacking off of Lisette, is that there's this other notion of, well, why you have so much you should be grateful for. Oh, you have your health, but you're fine. Like, yes, you might not be mentally doing well, but you have a perfect bill of health. You're fine. Why are you trying to cause a commotion? Why are you trying to get attention? Oh, you're just not grateful. Oh, you need to pray more. Or my favorite one is like, you're not white, get over it, right? And it's like, no, that's literally not what it is. And I think there's a lot of shame and stigma that maybe we might be causing to each other, and each other in the sense of like different generations of like, well, I had to deal with that and I'm fine. Or again, trying to normalize the unnormal and trying to think of, well, I had it worse. Oh, well, you're not having it just as bad as I am. And it's like, no, we're both on the same river. It's okay if we're both drowning. It's okay if you've drowned and you're trying to help me not drown. And it's just, what's the word? Like, it's so hard trying to bridge that gap where it's like, this isn't normal. I'm trying to ask for help. And then once they get that shut down of, you shouldn't be feeling this way, then it immediately turns off the idea of like, oh, I actually do need support. I do need to go get help. Versus like, oh, I have a headache. Okay, well, here's something you can take to help with your headache. Here, take this ice pack, take this hot compress, whatever it is, take this pill to help you feel better. Versus like, I don't know how to help you if you're feeling depressed. I don't know how to help you if you don't want it. I don't know how to help you if you don't want to be grateful. And I think a lot of that has to do with, it's a different kind of pain. It's a different kind of injury. And it's something that we can't really see.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think with physical symptoms, it is so normalized to go to the doctor and get medicine, and like it's a quick fix. And with, emotional symptoms, psychological symptoms, it's not normalized to get that support. And it's so hard for people to reach out and to start those conversations because, yeah, I agree with Sofia, the like, oh, why are you should be grateful. Why are you sad? And being shut down is so hard when you're being vulnerable and you're reaching out for maybe the first time. To hear something like that, it does, affect you. So I think it's difficult to start conversations when you don't know how it's going to be received, especially when you're in a very vulnerable position and you're talking about what you're feeling inside. It's just not normalized to talk and process your emotions. So I think that's something that impacts people.
Yeah, and I think that's beyond the Latino community, honestly. I think that people get shut down all the time when they try to express their feelings and their emotions. It's kind of like what Sofia says, you're met with, hey, don't be so dramatic, or don't be, it's like, no, just get over it type of thing. I think I hear it a lot from parents also, like, kind of like you were saying, Sofia, like parents, they're like, well, what does my kid have to be stressed about? They're going to school and they're getting fed, and they don't understand that the youth are experiencing a lot of stressors that may be different stressors than we did growing up, but they experience a lot of stress. And so I think just not understanding each other, or just acknowledging that, okay, maybe it doesn't stress me, but it stresses you, type of thing. It's interesting because there is a lot of that stigma. And I know that at YWCA, we've been trying to work on destigmatizing mental health. I know Lisette's been going out and doing a lot of platicas, and I've done a lot of platicas on educating people on what mental health and mental wellness actually are. Giving that terminology that Sofia, that you've mentioned earlier, that we don't have to be able to describe it. But I feel like also I'm really curious about you all, about what even prompted you to go into the mental health field, because there is so much stigma. I imagine that, and I experienced that myself too. It's like my mother not knowing, what are you doing? What is that? When you say you're working as a therapist or as a social worker, how did you all end up in the mental health field? And yeah.
Personally, for me, I mentioned earlier that I grew up in a small community in Austin, Texas, in South Austin, called Dove Springs, which is predominantly Latino. But also growing up in high school, And just, walking around my community, there was a lot of, violence, there was a lot of crime, there was a lot of poverty, there were a lot of food deserts. There was also a lot of mental health issues, right? And most of those were related to the other factors that came into play. So like immigration and acculturation and work stressors, right? So all of that kind of compiled, I began to notice how significant impacts those were for our community, for my community that I lived in, and how I wanted to envision a community that was healed. And I know for like a 16, 17-year-old, that's like, wow. That was like really like that was, but it was, I lived there, I walked those streets, and I saw it as an important issue. But also I grew up with a single mom. And so I saw her struggling through it, and it directly impacted our family. So whenever I was in high school, I was filling out applications for college, and I was like, hey, like, I really want to, I'm not sure what I want my major to be, but the social work major sounds very interesting. So as I began to take the classes, I began to realize this is what I'm passionate about, and this is what I want to fulfill. And to further that, right, I went to go get my master's degree because I wanted to be a therapist and to demystify mental health, but to help my community directly with therapy services. So that's what brought me here.
I think for me, it was kind of like, I knew I wanted to be in this field. I knew I wanted to help. And coincidentally enough, like my first thought was, I'm never going to work with Latino. I'm not going to do it. I know how stubborn we are. I know how, like, I don't want to do it. Coincidentally, here I am helping out the Latino community. And I think for me, going through the process of like, okay, I know I want to help, but I'm not entirely sure how. What happened to me in college, I had a rollover accident. Me and my husband at the time, we were engaged, and we were driving, and we had like this horrific accident, and came back, had symptoms of PTSD kind of thing, very typical, very normal at that time. Granted what had happened. And I remember going to see a therapist about it. And there were some things that I needed support with, like, I'm not telling my family I'm in therapy right now. She was like, oh, well, why not? And I'm like, because I can't tell them. And then trying to explain to her that this is still stigmatized in my own family. I can't express this to them. I need support on how can I support myself through this. And she was like, well, just tell them. And I couldn't get that support that I needed. And she did the best she could. I'm not saying anything. She was an amazing therapist, but I realized so quickly, if you were Latina, you would have understood. And so for me, that quickly prompted me to like, okay, you know what? I need to be a therapist for the Latino community. And then went further on to get my education, first in my family to get a graduate degree kind of thing, and trying to figure the nuances of everything else that's following. And coincidentally, when I first announced to my family I'm going to be a therapist, everyone was like, oh, you're going to make so much money, you're going to work with all the rich people, and that's what you're going to do. And then now it's turned into, hey, Sofia, I need help. How do I talk to so-and-so if they're dealing with this? Hey, how do I help tell them I'm here for you without saying I'm here for you? How can I go about this? And it's quickly turned into, oh, so now everyone's starting to recognize that, hey, this is an actual thing. And I think I've become this sort of like point person for my family and a lot of other Latinos. And I've heard it from my own clients. I'm so glad that you get it. I'm glad you're my therapist. I'm so glad my therapist is a Latina. So I think for me, that's become my, okay, this is exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. And this is exactly where I need to be right now.
For me personally, I started working with victims of domestic violence during my undergrad. And I always say that once I got introduced to the social work field, I could never turn back. Like I couldn't imagine myself doing anything else, just because there's so much awareness that comes with being in that field, and you start to recognize social issues and social injustices and understand like oppression and how it affects different individuals and how it creates barriers in people's lives. So I just wanted to keep going and be in the field. And also I'm lucky enough, and I recognize it's a privilege, to have an amazing support system that, I'm able to open up to, and they're very supportive, and I know that I will be accepted. And I've always wanted to give that to others too, and provide that support to others. And also going through my own therapy, and that journey, healing process was so life-changing that I just knew I wanted to give that to others.
Nice. Yeah. And support is just so important. It's like, it's kind of what makes or breaks trauma sometimes. It's like that if you're just, if your experience of trauma is dismissed, then it's more likely to get embedded in you. But if your experience of trauma is witnessed and acknowledged, and you're given the support, then it's less likely for it to get embedded in you. So I mean, I think that is so important, and I'm glad that you're all out there providing the support and hopefully continuing to expand that awareness for others. So in order to continue expanding that awareness for others, I would love to know what your thoughts are around, like, one of my fantasies is for us to be able to talk about mental health and mental wellness, just as we would talk about any other topic over dinner. Like, if I can come and ask you, hey, what movie did you see last night? And you're able to tell me and talk to me about it. So I would love for people to just commonly say, this is what I experienced, or this is how my day was. And, it was good and it was bad and this happened, so without that fear of judgment, without the fear of the stigma, what do y'all think needs to be in place for us to just openly talk about mental health?
I think that there needs to be a lot of normalization about the fact that mental health issues exist, and that they are common, and that it is very, very common nowadays to have a mental health issue related to any kind of lived experience. And so to be able to talk openly with your community or with your family, what does that mean? And I know that these conversations can get brought up indirectly with each other, and they can result in, well, the reality is that these issues exist, but it's very difficult to say, hey, I'm struggling with this actually, right? Mm-hmm. It's easier to say, I've witnessed people struggle with these issues, and to say, hey, like, I'm struggling emotionally. This is what's happening with me. Often for the fear of rejection, often for the fear of, again, being seen as vulnerable, being seen as weak, especially within the Latino community. So I think there needs to be more validation, more understanding, more patience, especially for our younger generations who are dealing with just a hike in technology, open accessibility, but also, right, both worlds, especially if they're first or second generation of, okay, so I am, again, I'm not Mexican enough, or I'm not white enough. And what does that mean for me? And, how will I be okay in that? So yeah, I think that there just needs to be a little bit more patience and acceptance and vulnerability.
You can go.
Yeah, I agree with that, Lisset. I think those conversations can be very difficult, but if you can find someone you trust to open up to, or at least, ask for help, that could be huge. But there needs to be normalization of emotions. And I think on a systemic level, it would be amazing to see it in schools, to see that awareness of mental health in schools, teach our kids how to self-regulate, coping skills, teach them about emotional regulation and things like that. But it can also be done in the home, and the way we talk to our kids and our families. And it makes me think of, like, the gender roles of like, oh, boys can't cry, boys need to be strong, but girls are weak and they're too emotional. And at the end of the day, that's just stigmatizing emotions and what is, okay to feel and what is not okay to feel. But if we just can talk about emotions and how emotions are okay and they're healthy and it's okay to process them and feel what we feel, I think that can be huge. So I think we can start having those conversations and raising awareness, also in the community, of the different services that there are. I know a lot of people in the community and in my social circle that had no idea what the YWCA did. And it's such an amazing organization that is so accessible. It makes therapy so accessible and mental health services. And a lot of the clients I've had at the YWCA, they had no idea until they, found out through a friend or a family member or something. So I think just keep talking and keep raising awareness about organizations like this and mental health.
Yeah, I think making everything familiar and understanding like, hey, we're all feeling this thing. This is kind of okay. And trying to destigmatize of like, oh, I've also felt that way. This is what we should do. And seeing that we're so quick to give each other tips and tricks on for new moms, or what's the fun one I've been hearing? Lower your blood pressure. This is what I've been doing to help with my allergies, and trying to normalize it with each other, with whether it be family and friends or even coworkers, even because we're so quick to easily say like, oh my God, yesterday was such a long day, just exhausting, and then leave it at that instead of going into detail of the nitty gritty of what everything was. And I think maybe being able to convey that message to each other and be able to feel safe in our spaces. And I'm thinking of like, if we don't feel safe in our spaces, then what do we do? And I'm thinking maybe we do need to start having bigger conversations around what needs to happen in order for us to feel safe enough to thrive and feel like, okay, this is a place where I can actually ask for help without feeling judged, without feeling any stigma, without being anything, and just be able to be safe. And I think that, to go off of what you were saying, Daniela, being in the school system, I've been working as a school-based therapist along with a lot of other different roles for the past 2 years. And it's been a blessing to see how much parents have heard like, oh, I heard you are in the school system as a therapist. How can I reach you for my child? And being able to recognize that and normalize that and have bigger conversations too, albeit we still need to have, there's still a lot more work to be done with normalizing it. But I think the first step is being able to reach the children, from my experience, and going off of that. And I think with kids nowadays, there's just so much trauma going around with literally everything, right? I'm not going to bring up the elephant in the room, but like COVID, right? And seeing those kids come back from COVID babies, the ones that haven't been in school for the past 2 years and some that are graduating this year, and realizing like, I don't remember having a good high school career because we were stuck in COVID, and trying to normalize that and understand like, hey, we're still trying to get back to what our normal was. We're still trying to get back to our social batteries, and we're trying to get back to whatever this normal is, and trying to normalize all of that, right? And I think that being able to go back to our circles and go back to whatever feels safe enough for us to normalize this. And even if we're not safe enough, now I'm thinking of like, what other ways could we start bringing around normalizing, hey, I'm feeling a certain type of way. And I think hopefully in my fantasy world, that's what we're able to do.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I think that's so important that you all mentioned safety, because I definitely think that is a big barrier, especially with parents, with kids, if they're afraid that systems are going to get involved if they disclose any kind of trauma, or that if the kid sees a counselor or at the school or anything, they're afraid that they're going to get involved in systems. And I think in Texas, especially with the way the legislations are going, especially anti-gender affirming care and CPS involvement and things like that, it's just parents are not going to be as open to sharing that. So sometimes that system is what needs to change for people to be able to speak more openly too. The other thing you all mentioned, I think, was that actually it was back to your story of Sofia, that you mentioned that it was so important for your therapist to, it would have been important for your therapist to understand exactly what you were saying, and possibly a Latina therapist would have. That culturally affirming care is so important too. And I know all of you speak Spanish too, so I know that you're offering services in people's native languages as well. So it's just so important to understand those little nuances in the culture, the language. And even though the Latino community is so expansive, it's not the same for someone who has roots in Mexico versus someone who has roots in Puerto Rico or something like that. It's not the same thing, but at least it's closer to speaking the language, and at least it's closer to understanding the values and being open to understanding the value system and the cultural strengths and resources that are within. Yeah. Any comments about that? I think I just went off on a little tangent there.
And I think even if you're not Latino, but you're working with a Latino population, again, like you said, Laura, being open to expanding your knowledge, right? To not just turn around to your Latino peer and say, hey, what is this? Or what does that mean? Right. And it's great to get other people's experiences or stories, but it's also important to do your due diligence and do the work and do the research and delve into these communities and work with these people directly in a way that's trauma-informed and empathetic.
And not pathologize either, not start pathologizing certain traditions or belief systems. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I really appreciate all the time that y'all have spent with me today. I was just curious also if there's anything else that maybe we didn't cover that you would really like to highlight, and also if there's any events or things that you would like to put out there for people to access.
I actually do have a program that I'm currently directing, and that is the Promotora's Community Health Worker Program. And the topic is actually demystifying mental health. And we are focused on working with the Latino community. Now, this program is in Spanish currently, but we're looking at implementing an English-based curriculum, and this is through through YWCA. So if you're interested, we will have an Eventbrite on our webpage on YWCA, and you can register for more information or for an information session.
Daniela or Sofia, any last words or anything to share?
I guess just for closing thoughts, just want to say that it's okay to ask for support, and it doesn't make anybody weak. It just makes people, it's actually very strong to show that vulnerability, and it's very honorable. So let's keep taking care of our communities and of ourselves. But yeah.
I love that we had this talk. I feel like being able to bring it back together and understand that we are here for each other, even if it's kind of hard for us to find, but not really hard for us to find, but not knowing where to find us. And I think being able to reach out to each other is very important right now, especially now more than ever, and being able to say, hey, I'm here. So if anyone needs anything, hey, I'm here.
Well, thank you all again. And I hope that, again, we continue growing and developing and working within our own families and our communities. And so I appreciate all your time, and please stay connected to us. Thank you.
So much.
Thank you.
Have a good one.